Monday morning, June 3rd, 1946, 8:47 a.m. Mrs. Rosa Martinez unlocked the front door of her restaurant on 125th Street. Rosa's Kitchen. She'd owned it for 12 years. Every morning, same routine. Unlock the door, turn on the lights, start the coffee, prep for the breakfast rush. But this morning was different. 3 men were waiting outside. Italian, well-dressed, expensive suits, polished shoes. They weren't customers. They walked in, sat down at the counter, ordered coffee. Mrs. Martinez poured. Her hands were steady, but she felt it. That tension in the air, the kind that means trouble. The oldest one spoke first. Maybe 45. Slicked back hair, gold watch. Nice place you got here, Mrs. Martinez. Thank you. Been here long? 12 years. He nodded. Sipped his coffee. That's a long time. Lot of hard work, I bet. Yes. Would be a shame if something happened to it. Mrs. Martinez's hand tightened on the coffee pot. The man smiled. Not a warm smile, a business smile. See, this neighborhood. It's dangerous. Fires, break-ins, vandalism. A woman like you, running a business alone. You need protection. I don't need... Yes, you do. His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Protection costs $200. Every week. Cash. Mrs. Martinez stared at him. $200 a week. That was more than her monthly rent. More than she made in profit some weeks. That would destroy her. I can't afford that. The man's smile didn't change. Then you can't afford not to have protection. Accidents happen to unprotected businesses. Fires, broken windows, equipment that mysteriously breaks. You understand what I'm saying. He wasn't threatening her. He was promising consequences. Mrs. Martinez understood perfectly. Pay or lose everything. The 3 men finished their coffee, left exact change on the counter. The leader paused at the door. We'll be back Friday. First payment due then. Have a nice day, Mrs. Martinez. They walked out. Mrs. Martinez stood there. Vrozen, 68 years old. Vito. 12 years of savings and sweat in this restaurant. And 3 men in suits had just told her, pay us or we'll destroy it. She wasn't the only one. By noon, 5 more businesses on 125th Street got the same visit. The bakery, the barbershop, the laundromat, the corner store, the jazz club, all black-owned, all told the same thing. You need protection. $200 a week. This wasn't new. Protection rackets had been bleeding Harlem for years. But June 3rd, 1946, was the day it stopped. Because by 2 p.m., someone made a phone call. And by 6 p.m., everything changed. Without a single shot fired. To understand what happened on June 3rd, you need to understand protection rackets. The Italian mob had been running them for decades. The system was simple, elegant, brutal. Step 1. Identify vulnerable businesses. Small operations, family-owned, no connections to power. In Harlem, that meant black-owned businesses. Step 2. Send well-dressed men to make the offer. Not thugs with guns, businessmen with smiles. You need protection. We provide it. For a fee. Step 3. Make the consequence of refusal clear. Not through direct threats. Through implications. Would be a shame if something happened. Accidents are common in this neighborhood. Fire safety is so important. They never said, we'll burn your store down. They didn't have to. Everyone understood. Step 4. Wait. Most business owners paid immediately. The ones who refused? Within days, something happened. A brick through the window. Equipment sabotaged. A small fire in the storage room. Nothing that could be traced back. Nothing the police would investigate. Just enough to make the point. Pay, or it gets worse. Step 5. Return. See, we told you. Dangerous neighborhood. Still want our protection? By then, most people paid. And once you started paying, you never stopped. Because if you stopped, they'd destroy you. Not as punishment. As an example. To show every other business owner what happens when you stop paying. It was extortion. Plain and simple. But in 1946 Harlem, there was no one to call for help. The police? Half of them were on the mob's payroll. The other half didn't care about black business owners. A black woman reports that Italian men are threatening her? That's a civil matter, ma'am. We can't do anything unless a crime is committed. Have you tried paying them? The system didn't protect black businesses. It enabled their exploitation. According to blackpast.org, protection rackets were draining an estimated $50,000 a month from Harlem businesses in the mid-1940 seconds. That's over $800,000 in today's money. Every month, going from hard-working business owners to organized crime, with no legal recourse. No protection. No hope. That's why when Mrs. Martinez and 5 other business owners got threatened on June 3rd, 1946, they didn't call the police. They called each other. And then one of them said something that changed everything. Call Bumpy. Before we get to what Bumpy did, you need to understand why these business owners had to call a gangster instead of the police. This was 1946 America. World War II had just ended. Soldiers were coming home. The economy was booming. But not for everyone. Harlem was still segregated. Still poor. Still ignored by the system. Black business owners faced obstacles. White business owners never thought about. Want a bank loan to expand your business? Denied. We don't lend to coloreds. Want police protection when criminals threaten you? Ignored. That's not a priority for us. Want insurance after your store is vandalized? Denied. Too risky in that neighborhood. The system was designed to fail black entrepreneurs. And the mob knew it. They knew that a black business owner couldn't go to the police, couldn't go to the courts, couldn't go to the banks, had no legal protection. So the mob filled that vacuum with illegal protection. Pay us or we'll destroy you. And because there was no legal alternative, most people paid. According to biography.com, Bumpy Johnson built his reputation in the 1940 seconds, specifically by doing what the legal system refused to do, protecting black businesses. Not out of pure altruism. Bumpy was still a criminal. He ran the numbers racket. He had his own operations. But he had a code, and part of that code was Harlem businesses belong to Harlem, not to outside crews, not to the Italian mob, not to anyone who didn't respect the community. When Mrs. Martinez and the other business owners called Bumpy on June 3rd, they weren't calling a stranger. They were calling the man who'd been protecting Harlem for 20 years, the man who understood that if outside crews could extort businesses, the entire community would collapse. The man who saw protecting black entrepreneurs as protecting Harlem itself. At 2:17 p.m., Mrs. Martinez called Bumpy Johnson. She was terrified, voice shaking. "Mr. Johnson, I'm sorry to bother you, but..." "Mrs. Martinez, I know. I've already heard." Word traveled fast in Harlem. By 2 p.m., Bumpy already knew about all 6 businesses being threatened. He'd been waiting for the call. "What do I do?" Mrs. Martinez asked. "Nothing," Bumpy said. "Don't pay them. Don't close. Don't worry. Open tomorrow like normal." "But they said..." "I know what they said. They're wrong. This is handled." "How?" "Thing. How?" "That's not your concern, Mrs. Martinez. Just trust me. Open tomorrow. Everything will be fine." He hung up. Mrs. Martinez stood there with the phone in her hand, not sure if she should feel relieved or more terrified. But she trusted Bumpy. Everyone in Harlem trusted Bumpy. Because unlike the police, unlike the courts, unlike the banks, Bumpy Johnson actually protected them. Now the question was, how would he stop an entire Italian mob protection crew without starting a war? Here's what most people expected Bumpy to do. Show up with guns. Confront the protection crew. Shoot someone to send a message. That's what gangster movies show. That's what people think power looks like. But Bumpy Johnson didn't do that. Because Bumpy understood something most people miss. Violence is expensive. Violence brings police attention. Violence starts wars. Violence creates blood feuds that last generations. And violence, most importantly, makes you the bad guy. Bumpy didn't want to be the bad guy. He wanted to be the protector. So instead of reaching for a gun, Bumpy made phone calls. 3 phone calls. That's it. First call, to his network in Harlem. I need to know everything about the crew threatening businesses on 125th. Who they are, who they work for, where they're staying, where they eat, where they go after work. I need to know by 4 p.m. By 3:45 p.m., Bumpy had a complete dossier. The crew was 3 men. Tony, the Smile Russo, the leader, mid-level enforcer for the Genovese family. Vinny Castellano, muscle, known for arson. Paulie DiMaggio, collector, handled the money. They were staying at a hotel in the Bronx. They had permission from their capo to expand operations into Harlem. They'd done this before in other neighborhoods. Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx. Always the same pattern. Threaten, collect, repeat. They'd never been stopped. Because they worked for the Genovese family. One of the 5 families. One of the most powerful crime organizations in America. Most people would have backed down at that point. You don't fight the Genovese family. You don't challenge the 5 families. That's suicide. But Bumpy Johnson didn't back down. He made his second phone call. This one was to someone outside Harlem. Someone in the Genovese family. Not Tony Russo. Not his capo. Higher. Much higher. Bumpy called a man named Frank Costello. Frank, the Prime Minister Costello. Acting boss of the Genovese family in 1946. One of the most powerful mobsters in America. Now here's what you need to understand. Bumpy Johnson and Frank Costello had a relationship. Not friendship. Mutual respect. According to biography.com, Bumpy had been negotiating with the Italian mob since the 1932nd. After the war with Dutch Schultz, Bumpy had proven he wasn't someone you could just push around. The commission, the governing body of the 5 families, had learned to work with him, not as a subordinate, as an independent operator who controlled Harlem. Frank Costello understood this. He understood that Bumpy Johnson running Harlem was good for business. Peaceful, profitable, no unnecessary attention. So when Bumpy called at 4:15 p.m., Costello took the call. Frank, we have a problem. What kind of problem? Your people are running a protection racket on my businesses. 125th Street. 6 locations so far. Gractor. Racker. Gractor. 125th Street. Silence. Then, what people? Tony Russo. Vinny Castellano. More silence. That wasn't authorized. I didn't think so. That's why I'm calling you instead of handling it my way. Frank Costello understood the implication. Bumpy could have killed all 3 men, could have started a war, could have made this messy in public. Instead, he was calling to give Costello a chance to handle it internally. That was respect. That was diplomacy. That was strategy. Give me 2 hours, Costello said. You have until 6 p.m. After that, I handle it my way. Understood. Bumpy hung up. He'd just done something remarkable. He'd turned a potential street war into a political negotiation. He'd gone over the heads of the protection crew directly to their boss. He'd given the Genovese family a choice. Control your people or I will. That's not gangster thinking. That's executive thinking. That's the kind of move that prevents wars instead of starting them. But Bumpy wasn't done. He made a third phone call. This one was to Tony Russo's hotel in the Bronx. Tony answered. Yeah? Tony Russo. My name is Bumpy Johnson. Silence. Everyone in the New York underworld knew that name. I know who you are. Good. Then you know. I run Harlem. And you know that the 6 businesses you threatened today are under my protection. We have permission. Not from me. And in Harlem, my permission is the only one that matters. Tony's voice hardened. We work for Frank Costello. You got a problem. Take it up with him. I did. An hour ago. He's calling your capo right now. But I wanted to give you a courtesy call too. What kind of courtesy? Bumpy's voice was calm, almost friendly. The kind where I tell you, don't go back to 125th Street. Don't collect from those businesses. Don't even think about retaliating. Just leave. Tonight. And we'll all pretend this never happened. Tony laughed. Or what? Or I stop being courteous. The line went dead. Tony Russo sat in his hotel room, staring at the phone. He'd just been threatened by Bumpy Johnson. Part of him wanted to prove he wasn't afraid. Go back to Harlem tomorrow. Collect the money. Show Bumpy who was really in charge. But another part of him, the part that had survived 20 years in the mob, told him something different. Bumpy Johnson didn't make threats. He made promises. At 5:23 p.m., Tony's phone rang. It was his capo. Change of plans. The Harlem operation is canceled. Costello's orders. Pack up. Come back to the Bronx. Tonight. Tony started to protest. But we already... Tonight, Tony. That's final. The line went dead. Tony Russo sat there, understanding exactly what had happened. Bumpy Johnson had gone over his head, straight to the top, and won, without firing a single shot. Now here's the brilliant part of what Bumpy did. He didn't just stop the protection racket. He stopped it in a way that prevented future attempts. See, if Bumpy had killed Tony Russo and his crew, what would have happened? The Genovese family would have sent more men, bigger crew, more guns. It would have escalated. Harlem would have become a war zone. Innocent people would have died. And even if Bumpy won that war, it would have cost him everything. Money, men, peace. That's why Bumpy didn't use violence. He used psychology. He understood something about organized crime that most people miss. It's still a business. And in business, you don't start wars over small markets. You negotiate. By calling Frank Costello directly, Bumpy did 3 things. First, he showed respect. He acknowledged Costello's authority. He didn't go behind his back. He called directly and said, "Your people are in my territory. Let's fix this before it becomes a problem." That's not weakness. That's strength through diplomacy. Second, he gave Costello an easy out. Costello could say, "Those guys acted without authorization. I'll pull them back." No loss of face. No admission of defeat. Just a simple correction. Third, he made the alternative clear. Handle this, or I will. Bumpy didn't say how he'd handle it. He didn't need to. Everyone knew Bumpy's reputation. Everyone knew what he was capable of. The implication was enough. Frank Costello understood immediately. This wasn't a challenge to his authority. This was a courtesy warning. Bumpy was saying, "I'm giving you a chance to control your people before I have to." And Costello, being a smart businessman, took the deal. Why? Because letting Bumpy handle 3 mid-level enforcers who overstepped was cheaper than going to war with Harlem. The math was simple. Tony Russo's protection racket might generate $10,000 a year. A war with Bumpy Johnson would cost millions. In lives, money, police attention, and reputation. Not worth it. So Costello made the call, pulled his people back, and the protection racket ended. But here's the deeper lesson. Bumpy Johnson understood that real power isn't about violence. It's about making violence unnecessary. The strongest person in the room isn't the one who starts fights. It's the one who prevents them. Bumpy could have killed those 3 men, easily. But then he'd be a killer. A problem. Someone the 5 families would eventually have to deal with. Instead, by handling it diplomatically, Bumpy reinforced his reputation as someone reasonable, someone you could negotiate with, someone who preferred business over bloodshed, but also someone you absolutely did not cross. That's sophisticated power. That's executive-level thinking. That's why Bumpy Johnson controlled Harlem for 40 years while other gangsters lasted 5. June 4th, 1946. 2 a.m. Mrs. Martinez opened Rosa's kitchen, hands shaking, not sure if Bumpy's promise would hold, not sure if Tony Russo would come back. She turned on the lights, started the coffee, waited. Wheat, 0 a.m. came. No Tony Russo. 9 a.m. No protection crew. 10 a.m. Nothing. By noon, Mrs. Martinez allowed herself to believe it. They weren't coming back. At 12:15 p.m., a man walked into the restaurant. Mrs. Martinez's heart stopped. But it wasn't Tony Russo. It was one of Bumpy's associates. He sat at the counter, ordered coffee, placed an envelope next to his cup. From Mr. Johnson. Mrs. Martinez opened it. Inside, a single piece of paper, handwritten. If anyone ever asks you for protection again, call me immediately. B.J. And below that, a phone number. The man finished his coffee, left money on the counter, walked out. Mrs. Martinez stood there, holding the note, and for the first time in 2 days, she smiled. She was protected, for real, not by a racket that bled her dry, but by someone who actually cared about Harlem businesses surviving. Word spread fast. By the end of the week, every business owner in Harlem knew what happened. Bumpy Johnson had stopped the protection racket, without violence, without drama, with a single phone call, and something shifted in Harlem that week. Business owners started calling Bumpy when outsiders threatened them, not to pay him protection money, but because he actually provided protection. According to blackpast.org, Bumpy Johnson became known throughout the 1,940 and 50 seconds as the unofficial protector of black businesses in Harlem. When the Italian mob tried to muscle in, Bumpy stopped them. When corrupt cops tried to shake down businesses, Bumpy intervened. When anyone threatened Harlem entrepreneurs, they had to deal with Bumpy first. And that created something remarkable: economic stability. Black businesses in Harlem thrived under Bumpy's protection in a way they couldn't under the legal system, because the legal system didn't protect them. The police didn't care. The courts didn't help. But Bumpy Johnson did. Not out of pure altruism. Bumpy took a small percentage from the numbers racket and other operations. He wasn't a charity, but he understood something the Italian mob didn't. Sustainable business relationships are built on mutual benefit, not fear. The Italian mob's protection racket bled businesses dry, took so much that businesses couldn't survive. Bumpy's approach was different. Take a little, provide real protection, let the businesses thrive, and everyone wins. That's not just gangster thinking. That's economic philosophy. And it worked. For 20 years, Harlem businesses operated under Bumpy's protection. And during those 20 years, Harlem's economy grew. Black-owned restaurants expanded. Jazz clubs flourished. Barbershops became community centers. Small businesses became successful enterprises. Not despite Bumpy Johnson. In many ways, because of him. That's complicated legacy. He was a criminal. He broke laws. He ran illegal operations. But he also protected a community when no one else would. He filled a vacuum the legal system created. He provided services the government refused to provide. That doesn't make crime right, but it makes the situation understandable. And it raises uncomfortable questions about what happens when the system fails so completely that criminals become the only source of justice. Let's break down exactly why Bumpy's approach worked when violence would have failed. Reason 1. He avoided becoming the aggressor. If Bumpy had killed Tony Russo, he'd be the one who started the conflict. The Genovese family would have to retaliate, not because they cared about Tony specifically, but because not retaliating makes you look weak. By calling Costello first, Bumpy made the Genovese family the problem solvers, not the victims. Reason 2. He gave everyone an easy exit. Costello could say his men acted without authorization. Tony could say he was just following orders. Nobody lost face. Nobody had to seek revenge. The situation just ended. That's sophisticated conflict resolution. Reason 3. He demonstrated capability without using it. By calling Costello, Bumpy showed he had connections high up. By calling Tony directly, he showed he knew where they were staying. By making it clear he could handle it his way, he showed he had the means to use violence if necessary. But by not using violence, he showed he was reasonable. That's the perfect combination. Capable of extreme action, but choosing restraint. That's more terrifying than actual violence, because it means you're dealing with someone who makes calculated decisions, not emotional ones. Reason 4. He established a precedent. After June 1946, every other crew looking at Harlem knew you don't run rackets there without Bumpy's permission. Not because he killed people who tried, but because he had the connections and intelligence to shut you down without firing a shot. That's deterrence. That's long-term strategic thinking. One phone call in June 1946 prevented dozens of similar attempts over the next 20 years. Reason 5. He built allies instead of enemies. By respecting Costello's authority, Bumpy maintained their working relationship. By protecting Mrs. Martinez and other business owners, he built loyalty in Harlem. By handling it quietly, he didn't attract police attention. Everyone won, except the three-man crew that overstepped. That's masterclass diplomacy. Compare that to what would have happened with violence. Scenario: Bumpy kills Tony Russo and his crew. Result: war with the Genovese family, police investigation, media attention, federal involvement, dozens of deaths, millions in costs. Harlem becomes a war zone. And even if Bumpy wins, he's now marked as too dangerous to work with. The other four families decide he needs to go, and eventually, they get him. That's why violence fails. It might win the battle, but it loses the war. Bumpy understood this. He understood that true power isn't about proving you're the toughest. It's about making everyone realize that working with you is smarter than working against you. That's the difference between a gangster and a statesman. A gangster reacts with violence. A statesman creates situations where violence becomes unnecessary. Bumpy Johnson was a criminal. But in moments like June 3rd, 1946, he operated like a statesman. And that's why he lasted 40 years in a world where most don't last 4. So, what's the real lesson of June 3rd, 1946? It's not about crime. It's not about mob politics. It's about power. Real power. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. See, most people think power looks like violence. The loudest voice. The biggest gun. The most aggressive move. But Bumpy Johnson proved that's not power. That's desperation. Real power is making your enemies choose not to fight you. Real power is turning potential wars into phone calls. Real power is protecting people without them even knowing you were involved. Mrs. Martinez opened her restaurant on June 4th not knowing what Bumpy did. She just knew she was safe. That's power. invisible, effective, undeniable. This applies far beyond the criminal world. In business, the most successful people aren't the most aggressive. They're the most strategic. They know when to negotiate and when to dominate. They build relationships that make competition irrelevant. In leadership, the best leaders don't rule through fear. They create environments where following them is the obvious choice. They inspire loyalty instead of demanding obedience. In conflict, the strongest position isn't escalation. It's de-escalation from a position of strength. It's saying, I could destroy you, but I'm choosing not to. Let's find a better way. Bumpy Johnson had every reason to be violent on June 3rd, 1946. His reputation was on the line. His territory was being challenged. His people were threatened. Violence would have been justified. Expected, even. But violence would have cost him everything. So instead, he made 3 phone calls. 3 phone calls that ended the threat. 3 phone calls that protected 6 businesses. 3 phone calls that prevented a war. That's genius-level strategy. And the deeper lesson is this: restraint from a position of strength is more powerful than violence from a position of weakness. Anyone can throw a punch. Only the truly powerful can choose not to. When Tony Russo threatened Mrs. Martinez, he thought he had power. He had guns. He had backup. He had a powerful crime family behind him. But he didn't have real power. Because real power isn't what you can do. It's what you can prevent. Bumpy Johnson prevented a war. Prevented businesses from closing. Prevented deaths. With nothing but intelligence, connections, and strategic thinking. That's more impressive than any shootout. That's more valuable than any body count. That's the kind of power that lasts. In a world that glorifies violence, Bumpy Johnson proved that sometimes the strongest move is the one you don't make. The punch you don't throw. The war you don't start. The threat you de-escalate instead of escalate. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. And that's why, 78 years after June 3rd, 1946, we're still telling this story. Not because violence is impressive, but because intelligence always deserves respect. June 3rd, 1946 became a turning point. Not just for those 6 businesses, for all of Harlem. After that day, the Italian mob's protection rackets largely stayed out of Harlem. Not because they were afraid, because the math didn't work. Bumpy had proven that Harlem wasn't easy money. It was complicated territory that required negotiation with someone who had connections up the chain. Easier to operate elsewhere. For the next 20 years, Bumpy Johnson continued protecting black businesses. According to biography.com, he became known as the Robin Hood of Harlem, taking from illegal operations and protecting the community. Not perfect, not a hero in the traditional sense, but a protector in a world where legal protection didn't exist. Mrs. Martinez kept that note from Bumpy for the rest of her life, kept it in a frame behind the counter at Rosa's kitchen. She never called the number, never needed to. Just knowing it was there was enough. She ran that restaurant successfully until 1968, expanded to 2 locations, hired 20 employees, sent 3 kids to college on the profits, all because, on June 3rd, 1946, Bumpy Johnson made sure she could stay in business. The 5 other businesses threatened that day all survived, all thrived. The bakery became a Harlem institution. The barbershop operated for 50 years. The jazz club hosted legends. Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Ella Fitzgerald. The laundromat became a community gathering place. The corner store employed 3 generations of the same family. All because Bumpy Johnson understood something the system didn't. Protecting black businesses meant protecting the entire community. And when the community thrived, everyone benefited, including Bumpy. That's sustainable power, not extraction. Investment, not exploitation. Protection, not destruction. Building. Bumpy Johnson died on July 7th, 1968. Heart attack. Age tugtrids. His funeral was attended by thousands. Among them, business owners he'd protected, families he'd helped, community leaders who acknowledged that despite his criminal activities, Bumpy had done more to protect Harlem than the police ever did. Mrs. Martinez attended. She was 80 years old by then. She placed a single rose on his casket. Someone asked her why. She said, "Because he saved my restaurant. And when the law wouldn't protect me, he did." That's Bumpy Johnson's legacy. Complicated, criminal, but undeniably impactful. He operated outside the law because the law didn't work for his community. He used illegal power to provide services the legal system refused to provide. That doesn't make crime right, but it makes the situation understandable, and it forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What happens when the system fails so completely that criminals become the only source of justice? What does it say about our society when a gangster provides better protection than the police? How broken does a system have to be before people choose illegal protection over legal institutions? These aren't easy questions. They don't have simple answers, but they're questions we need to ask. Because June 3rd, 1946 wasn't really about Bumpy Johnson. It was about a system that forced Mrs. Martinez to choose between paying extortion to the mob or calling a criminal for help. Both illegal options. Because the legal option, police protection, didn't exist for her. That's the real tragedy. Not that Bumpy was a criminal, but that criminals were the only ones protecting black businesses. And that's something we should never forget. June 3rd, 1946, 8337 a.m. 3 men in suits walked into Mrs. Martinez's restaurant, demanded $200 a week for protection. By 6 p.m. that same day, they were gone, and they never came back. No shots fired, no violence, no war, just 3 phone calls. That's the story of how Bumpy Johnson stopped a protection racket without firing a single shot. But it's also the story of something bigger. Intelligence over violence. Strategy over aggression. Long-term thinking over short-term satisfaction. Bumpy Johnson could have killed those 3 men. Could have made an example of them. Could have started a war. But he didn't. Because he understood that real power isn't about proving how dangerous you are. It's about making danger unnecessary. That's the lesson. In business. In leadership. In life. The strongest move isn't always the most aggressive one. Sometimes it's the phone call, the negotiation, the solution that lets everyone walk away. Bumpy Johnson was a criminal. He broke laws. He hurt people. He operated outside society. But on June 3rd, 1946, he also protected 6 small businesses from being destroyed. Protected them using intelligence, connections, and strategy. Without a single shot. That's complicated. That's messy. That's real. And that's why we tell this story. Not to glorify crime, but to recognize intelligence wherever we find it. And to ask the hard questions about what kind of system forces people to choose criminals over cops for protection. If this story made you think differently about power, hit that subscribe button. We're telling the real stories of Harlem. The complicated ones. The ones that don't fit easy narratives. The ones that show how people survived in a system designed to crush them. Drop a comment. What would you have done in Mrs. Martinez's situation? Called the police, who wouldn't help? Paid the mob? Or called Bumpy? Hit the like button if you think strategy beats violence every time. Turn on notifications because next week, we're revealing how Bumpy Johnson mentored Malcolm X. The lessons a gangster taught a revolutionary. the conversations that shaped the civil rights movement. You won't want to miss that. Remember, June 3rd, 1946. 3 phone calls stopped what could have been a war. That's not luck. That's power. Real power. The kind that doesn't need guns, just intelligence. Rest in power. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the protector, the strategist, the man who proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one you never use. This is Harlem Chronicles, telling the stories they don't want you to know. See you next time.